We do have something that we can report now, and that is from West Virginia. Donald Trump has picked up the state of West Virginia and its 4 electoral votes. Trump won there by 39%, 39 points in 2020. This was expected now officially in Trump's category. And we do have one more of our first key Senate races. We're tracking the Senate as well and control of the Senate at the end of the night. Take a look. You can see Jim Justice, the governor of West Virginia. He will fill the open seat. Senator Joe Manchin, who was a Democrat, became an independent as of late, retiring after 2 full terms in the Senate. Jim Justice will now represent West Virginia. I want to get rid of Rachel Scott because she covers Congress, Capitol Hill. Rachel, as we know, in the Senate, all eyes on how many seats. They only need to pick up 2, the Republicans, to take back control of the Senate. Here's their first pickup. And again, this is the number at the end of the night, so there could be surprises elsewhere. But a lot of eyes on Sherrod Brown in Ohio and Jon Tester in Montana. These are both states that Donald Trump won handily, and they're trying to defend their seats.
Yeah, and Senator Joe Manchin, who decided not to run for re-election, gave Democrats a whole lot of headaches when President Biden, during that first administration, his first couple of months in there. But the biggest one is probably this one right here, because it almost ensured that this seat was going to go toward Republicans, already netting 1 right now. David, you said it. They have to net 2 by the end of tonight.
We do have a key state that used to be a battleground where we can now declare a winner. ABC News now projecting that Donald Trump will win the state of Florida, his home state. Florida, popular Florida governor there, Ron DeSantis as well, who ran against Donald Trump in the primary. Donald Trump will pick up the 30 electoral votes from his home state of Florida. That's with 77% of the vote coming in. Donald Trump also winning tonight, Tennessee, 11 electoral votes there. He won it in 2020, wins it again. Missouri, Donald Trump picks up 10 more electoral votes. Donald Trump wins the state of Alabama, 9 electoral votes from Alabama. In Oklahoma tonight, one of the most Republican states in the country, Donald Trump picks up another 7 electoral votes. Vice President Kamala Harris wins in the solidly Democratic state of Massachusetts, 11 electoral votes. Joe Biden, of course, won there handily by 33 points 4 years ago. Vice President Kamala Harris winning the state of Maryland tonight, 10 electoral votes there. We're going to be watching that Senate race very closely. The District of Columbia tonight, 3 electoral votes. The winner, Vice President Kamala Harris. In Illinois tonight, we're watching the raw numbers coming in. Obviously, too early to call. As soon as we got numbers on the board, we'll go back to that. 19 electoral votes up for grab. New Jersey, not a winner yet, 14 electoral votes. The polls have just closed in Connecticut as well. They've closed in Mississippi. They've closed in Maine. And in New Hampshire, a lot of talk about New Hampshire in these recent days. Kamala Harris had held a commanding lead in some of the polls. As it got closer to Election Day, some of those polls tightened, so there'll be some interest in New Hampshire tonight. In Rhode Island, they just closed the polls there. 4 electoral votes up for grabs. In Delaware, 3 electoral votes up for grabs. They've just closed the polls there. Let's take a look at the map so far. Kamala Harris winning 3 states in Washington, D.C. Donald Trump picking up 8 states tonight. As you can see, the electoral count right there on your screen, 27 to 90 on the race to 270. We do have, it's now 9 p.m. in the East. The polls have now closed in 15 more states, 41 states in all. The battlegrounds of Michigan, Wisconsin, and Arizona are now closed at this hour. ABC News can take a look at some of these numbers coming in from Michigan. Just 8% of the vote in. Kamala Harris with a lead, 54 to 43, obviously very early in the night. In Wisconsin, you can see that we have no numbers yet. At the moment we do, we'll go back to the Wisconsin board. Arizona's now closed, 11 electoral votes, a key battleground state. Pennsylvania, the numbers continue to come in, 19 electoral votes up for grabs. Really a must-win state for both of these candidates. Kamala Harris with an early lead here, though, 15% of the vote in, still far too early. North Carolina, 16 electoral votes, 38% of the vote in. Donald Trump with a lead in that state. He's leading by about 100,000 votes. We'll take a deeper dive on North Carolina in just a moment here. In Georgia, 66% of the vote in. And as you look there, Donald Trump leading by about 200,000 votes. That number has been stubborn for the last 30 minutes or so. We'll take a look at the reasons why and where Kamala Harris needs to be performing better if she's going to catch up to Donald Trump in Georgia. In Texas at this hour, we can project, ABC News now projecting that Donald Trump will win the 40 electoral votes of Texas. Donald Trump wins Texas tonight. He also wins North Dakota, 3 electoral votes. That was expected. He won by 33 points just 4 years ago. South Dakota, Donald Trump wins 3 electoral votes. He wins Wyoming tonight, 3 more electoral votes from Wyoming. New York, the polls have closed. We're tracking the numbers coming in from New York at this hour. Minnesota, the polls have closed. In Colorado, the 9 electoral votes up for grabs. The polls have closed there. We'll track it. Louisiana, the polls have closed in Iowa and in Kansas. They've closed in Nebraska and in New Mexico tonight. 5 electoral votes up for grabs. We'll continue to track that as well. The polls have closed in all of those states. Let's go right to the map. The road to 270, which is the road to the White House, as we know. Kamala Harris winning 3 states, plus Washington, D.C. for 27 electoral votes. Donald Trump with 14 states so far, 154 electoral votes. Back to ABC News Live election night coverage now 9:30 here in the East. The polls have now closed in 41 states across this great country, including 6 of the 7 battleground states. Nevada will close in just about 30 minutes. At this hour, here are the results we can report so far in Pennsylvania. Again, this is just still underway in these swing states. Pennsylvania, 55% to 43%. Again, we have to look at the counties and what we're talking about when we're looking at that vote still very early. In Michigan, you can see Kamala Harris taking an early lead in Michigan, and in Wisconsin tonight, Donald Trump with the early lead. We're going to dive into where these numbers are actually coming from in just a moment. We're also tracking Georgia. We're tracking North Carolina and Arizona at this hour. No numbers from Arizona, though the polls have now closed. In Georgia, Donald Trump holding on to that lead. Looks like it's now just about more than 100,000 votes now, widening his lead and holding firm. In North Carolina, still a close race. And again, there's some outstanding vote in some of the Democratic areas. We'll dig deeper into that in just a moment. New York, we can now project. ABC News projecting that the state of New York, 28 electoral votes. Kamala Harris has won the state of New York. In Rhode Island, 4 electoral votes. Vice President Harris wins the 4 votes there. Former President Donald Trump winning the state of Louisiana, 8 electoral votes. He picks up from Louisiana. Let's go right to the map, the race to 270. Kamala Harris winning 6 states in Washington, D.C., 62 electoral votes. Donald Trump winning 15 states, 162 electoral votes in the march to 270. We do have a Senate projection. ABC News can report that in the state of New York, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand will serve a 3rd term. She was seeking the 3rd term. She wins it handily tonight. She'll return to the Senate. Let's get right to we have some races to call at this hour. We can project that in Mississippi, the winner of that race, former President Donald Trump, picks up 6 electoral votes in Mississippi. He also wins Ohio, 17 electoral votes. Used to be a battleground state. Trump has won Ohio before. He wins it again tonight. Of course, we're watching the Ohio Senate race right now. The Democrat Senator Sherrod Brown seeking a 4th term, trailing businessman Bernie Moreno, who's never run before. Colombian roots. He leads by almost 5 points here. It's going to be a difficult race to make up that kind of ground with 76% of the vote in. We're going to keep our eye on that. We do have another race to call, and a race that makes history tonight in Maryland. Voters have elected Democrat Angela Alsobrooks to serve in the Senate. Republican Larry Hogan, the popular governor there, had been challenging her for that open seat. Angela Alsobrooks becomes the next senator from the state of Maryland. And Lindsay Davis, she makes history, and a lot of history made tonight. She'll be the 2nd black woman elected to the Senate on this election night.
We're talking about Carol Moseley Braun and Kamala Harris. Obviously, prior to this day, in our country's nearly 250-year history, it only had 2 black women ever elected to the U.S. Senate. And tonight, you have 2 more. What's really significant, I think, to put this into broader perspective, is we've still never had a black female govern a state in this country. And so tonight, the Democratic Party is asking American citizens to do something that they haven't even done on a state level. They're asking to vote for this woman to run and rule and reign over this entire country, which it just really puts in perspective that we're just now getting to this point of having 4 black women elected into the Senate. It was interesting when I had a chance to speak with Angela Alsobrooks just last week. She talked about how her family is from South Carolina, and it was because her great-grandfather had been shot by a white sheriff's deputy that they fled to Maryland, and that's what made her decide that she wanted to be a prosecutor and ultimately get into politics.
And down in Brazil, Angela Alsobrooks has talked about how, as a young prosecutor, she got advice from another prosecutor.
That's right. Vice President Kamala Harris was elected prosecutor in 2004. She mentored Angela Alsobrooks, but I also have to take a moment of personal pride. She was my first intern on Capitol Hill. So I'm very excited about that, but she's been a terrific executive. In both her primary campaign, she was outraised almost 10-1, as well as in general election. Look, Larry Hogan is a great guy. People love him in Maryland, but they understood a vote for Mr. Hogan was a vote for Mitch McConnell, a vote for the Supreme Court. Angela had her message focused on the economy, the issue of abortion, because abortion was on the ballot in the great state of Maryland. But she also had a special appeal, I think, to young women across the state. That's going to be the hidden story tonight.
11 p.m. in the east, 8 p.m. in the west. Polls are now closed in 48 states, including California, with the biggest prize of the night. It's 54 electoral votes at this hour. As you can see in Georgia, we're also following these key battlegrounds. Kamala Harris behind Donald Trump by about 2 points in Georgia, 89% of the vote in, 16 electoral votes on the line right there. North Carolina tonight, still, we can't call this race either. A close race, 85% of the vote in, as you can see, a margin of just about 150,000 votes between them. In Pennsylvania, perhaps the biggest battleground state prize of the night, 67% of the vote in, Donald Trump taking a slight lead over Kamala Harris. There's still significant outstanding vote in the Philadelphia area and other Democratic strongholds. The question is it enough to help catch her back up, and how tight will this race be in the end? We always knew Pennsylvania could be very tight, 19 electoral votes on the line. Michigan at this hour, take a look. These are the numbers. Kamala Harris with a slight lead in that state, just 29% of the vote in at this hour. The vice president leads the former president in that state. And in Wisconsin, 4 out of the last 6 presidential elections, Wisconsin decided by less than a point. 59% of the vote in, 10 electoral votes on the line, and you can see a very close race, about 30,000 votes in between the two candidates. Let's look at Arizona at this hour. Look at that, 49.5, 49.6 in Arizona. Obviously can't call that race. Nevada tonight, the numbers have not come in yet. Another battleground, though, obviously, where the polls have closed. There are projections we can make at this hour, so let's get right to them. In the state of California, Vice President Kamala Harris, where she was once the Attorney General and the senator of that state, she wins in that state, picks up its 54 electoral votes. In Idaho tonight, former President Donald Trump picks up 4 electoral votes from Idaho. Washington State, the polls have closed. The raw vote coming in. The number's not there yet. The moment we have it, we'll put it back up on the screen. Too early to call. And in Oregon, the polls have just closed. Cannot call that state as well. Let's look at the map tonight. 270, again, the magic number in the Electoral College. Here's what we've got. Kamala Harris with 9 states plus Washington, D.C., 145 electoral votes. Donald Trump with 23 states, 214 electoral votes. And, of course, those key battleground states, Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, all of them. The votes are coming in, and in all of those states, it's extraordinarily close. Our coverage of the 2024 presidential election, it could last for weeks. I'm not sure. I was just making sure you're all still here with me. It continues right now. So we do have a state to call, and this is a big one. It's North Carolina. 16 electoral votes go to former President Donald Trump. He has won the state of North Carolina tonight. Let's get right over to Rick Klein at the board. Let's show our viewers how this played out. North Carolina now in Donald Trump's column, and we can start doing these hypotheticals, the sort of the rest of the pathway to get to 270.
Yeah, this is the first major battleground state that has been projected by ABC News. So this assumes that everything else happens the way that we expect. A big if. We haven't gotten results out of a lot of safe blue states in particular tonight. But this changes the electoral math in some very significant ways. Right now, Donald Trump is in a commanding position, not just in North Carolina, but also in Georgia. If you were to award him those 2 states, he is at 251 electoral votes. That leaves him the opportunity to win the Electoral College just with Pennsylvania. If Pennsylvania falls for him, that's enough. But let's assume that doesn't happen. Then you've got some other possibilities. We've been talking a lot about the other blue wall states, Michigan or Wisconsin. You take one of those and any other state on the map, and you've got 270. So you can do that with Michigan. You can do that with Wisconsin. Similar situation that you need a slightly bigger state than Nevada. In that case, you need Arizona to work. Once again, for Harris, it's now a vanishingly small map. The biggest opportunity still Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan. It doesn't matter that she's lost North Carolina or even that she loses these others. The other possibility that could be intriguing, given what we're seeing out west, is that she pieces something else together. Pennsylvania is an absolute must-win at this point. No question about it. She needs to win that state. But she could win Wisconsin in addition to Arizona and Nevada and get 270 electoral votes. She could also trade Wisconsin for Michigan and end up in the same place. But this does change very significantly where things stand. Just by our 538 calculations, Donald Trump already at around a 70% chance of winning, just based on the North Carolina call, not even taking into account the other trends that we've been talking about of the kind of red shift that we've seen across so many communities in this country.
We have another state to call, and this is a big one, Georgia. And as we heard from the Secretary of State earlier, forecasted this moment, 16 electoral votes going to former President Donald Trump. He wins the key state of Georgia. He lost it to President Biden 4 years ago by about 11,000 votes. He was determined to win that state back. He has done exactly exactly that tonight. A margin about 100,000 votes or so between him and Kamala Harris. This is a big win, Rick.
Yeah, it's huge, and it changes the electoral map in a very significant way now. Because if you now can put both of those southern states in the Trump column, this puts all of the pressure now on Kamala Harris to run the table in the upper Midwest. She will absolutely need to win Pennsylvania, in addition to most likely Michigan and Wisconsin. Right now, the 538 chances, just based on these states, and that doesn't take into account the margin in the other states, an 80% chance of a Trump victory. And if you're just looking at the pure math right now, if you flip Pennsylvania to Trump, that's 270 electoral votes right there. If you put this back here, give him a Wisconsin and a Michigan, that gets you to 270, or Michigan plus a Nevada. There's a lot of paths that are now open up to Donald Trump because he was able to hold those two states. One of them he won twice. The other one he won once and then gave back. And we remember that margin, 11,779. It became famous because of that recording. And it looks like tonight it's going to be a lot bigger margin than that in the state of Georgia. Right now it's 118,000 votes. There's still some votes left, but we've seen these blue dots shrink over the night. The story will be that the Atlanta area did not come through in the same kind of margins. And the redder parts of the state, as we've been discussing tonight, we just have seen Donald Trump hold his numbers and overperform his numbers in county after county, bringing his numbers to a level that, frankly, he hadn't seen before. And that to me is just a remarkable part of the story tonight, to see how many places he was able to not just do what he had done before, but build on what he had done before, to grow his vote share in county after county to add up to this win tonight in Georgia.
Here's the call of the night. We can project now that Pennsylvania, the biggest battleground prize of the night, will go to former President Donald Trump. ABC News can now project that Donald Trump has won the 19 electoral votes in the state of Pennsylvania. We had said for many weeks leading up to this election that this was a must-win state for both Kamala Harris and for Donald Trump. ABC News now projecting Donald Trump wins the state of Pennsylvania. Rick Klein, take us to the board. That essentially gets him the presidency, although we have not called what he absolutely needs to get there, right? But you see the path on the board. Talk us through it.
I want to be careful with the math here. That gives us, according to ABC News projections, 265 electoral votes for Donald Trump. And I want to then play things through a little bit and make the assumptions, and they are assumptions, but this is how things work in politics. If everything falls into place for some of the remaining places, Alaska with the 3 electoral votes would be a shock if Alaska did not land for Donald Trump. One of the congressional districts in Nebraska, where he's currently leading, he's already been awarded one of them, and one of the congressional districts in Maine. This is what we're looking at. That would be 270 electoral votes. So again, being very careful here. We have him at 265, but you don't.
So that number up on the board is the hypothetical.
That is
if he gets what's expected to go his way, the final dominoes here. But Mark Burstein, our producer, just tell me again what Nebraska 1 goes to Trump. There we go. We're now projecting one electoral vote from Nebraska will go to Donald Trump. That's the one that you thought would go his way.
Yes.
Again, this is still the hypothetical number we have up there. So the chips are falling into place in so many words here.
That's exactly right. I mean, Alaska is a very Republican state. It's going to vote for Donald Trump almost certainly, and that
which gets into 269.
That would be that's correct. 269, which would be a tie in the Electoral College under the rules. It would be broken by the House of Representatives. Almost certainly, the House of Representatives will be controlled by enough Republican delegations to give Donald Trump the presidency. But that other district in Maine would be the majority maker. And look, we still have Michigan, Wisconsin, Nevada, and Arizona.
And he leads in Michigan and Wisconsin.
That's correct. Right now, based on the numbers, 266,000 votes in Michigan, although there's still a lot of Detroit left, and 120,000 or so votes in Wisconsin. Nevada is still coming in. Trump is up there right now by about 99,000 votes and up 19. So he's up in every other state that we have on the board tonight.
So we're waiting to hear from the former president here. Obviously, we've just projected, ABC News projecting Pennsylvania, the biggest prize of the night among those key 7 battleground states, goes to Donald Trump. Really not a path here on the board for Kamala Harris at this point. It's just the final chips for Donald Trump.
This is an ABC News election update. Now reporting, David Muir.
Good morning. It's now 5:35 here in the East. We are allowing all of our stations across the country to join us now with the breaking news. We are projecting at this hour the 47th President of the United States, Donald Trump, will be elected to return to the White House. Not consecutive terms. We mentioned a moment ago as we were on our air with our coverage, the first since Grover Cleveland to serve non-consecutive presidential terms. Donald Trump returning to the White House as the 47th President of the United States. He does so with Wisconsin now in his win column. Of course, there are a number of states on the map that still look pretty favorable for Donald Trump tonight, but Wisconsin was the state that put him over the map, getting him to 279 at this point, to Kamala Harris's 219 electoral votes. I'm going to quickly rejoin the team here so that the entire network can hear a little bit of what we're our early analysis. And John, as you and I have been saying all night long, this is an extraordinary political comeback. You say we've never seen anything like it.
Look, the greatest political comeback in American history, and a victory unlike any that Donald Trump has ever seen, because not only does he win what appears to be a decisive electoral college victory, it seems like he is on the verge of winning the popular vote as well. So he comes back to the White House. Remarkable when you consider the way he left the White House in January of 2021. He comes back to the White House with a mandate. The majority of the American people, it seems, ultimately, when all the votes are counted, will be saying they want Donald Trump to be president. Now, that said, David, he faces the challenge of uniting a deeply divided country. And the nearly half the country that voted against him, many of them see him as not somebody that they simply didn't want in the White House, but see him as a threat. So now the question is, how does he convince those people that he can be a president for all Americans, including those who didn't vote for him?
One of the central questions moving forward, you're absolutely right, John. One of the questions in looking back, and there will be many of them, come for this White House. Mary Bruce, you've covered the White House now, the Biden-Harris administration. A lot of people are going to be looking to President Biden, his decision to bow out after that horrible debate performance in June, whether or not that was a decision that should have been made earlier, that would have perhaps given the Democratic Party more time to do some sort of primary. He did, or would have given Kamala Harris more time. However it turned out, or whoever the Democratic Party chose or people voted for, perhaps that would have given them more than 107 days, which is all she had to introduce herself as a candidate at the top of the ticket.
There's certainly going to be a lot of discussions and deep soul searching, I think, within the Democratic Party about how this all unfolded, and a lot of deep questions for the president about the way he went out of this race, the timing of this. Could the outcome have been different if Democrats had had time for a primary, for instance? But Kamala Harris, in those 107 days, really cast herself as the change candidate. That is hard to do when you are the sitting vice president. And when you look back at how things could have been different, I think we have been discussing this all night long and into the wee hours here. The fact that she wasn't able to really differentiate herself enough from the president to say to Americans who are suffering economically that what she would do differently, and to really put a fine point on that, I think is going to go down as one of the biggest errors in this campaign.
And will define the Biden presidency
Yes.
to a large part. Yes. And President Biden, for the longest time, thought he was best positioned to keep Donald Trump returning to the White House. That's a calculation they'll all have to look back on.
It is a sweeping and stunning victory, unlike any in our history. It will be studied and debated for generations, the impact broad and deep, a turning point for the country. Rachel Scott has been on the road with the Trump campaign. She starts us off. Good morning, Rachel.
Guys, good morning. I would say good morning, but we never actually said good night. We just projected this race. It was a historic run for president, and now a historic return to the White House after a 2-year-long campaign. Donald Trump, a convicted felon who survived 2 assassination attempts, making a remarkable comeback to become the next president of the United States.
This morning, Donald Trump projected to be the next president of the United States.
Well, I want to thank you all very much.
The former president once again outperforming expectations, shocking his political opponents, and sweeping enough of the battleground states to win the White House.
Many people have told me that God spared my life for a reason. And that reason was to save our country and to restore America to greatness. And now we are going to fulfill that mission together.
Overnight, Trump addressing a fired-up crowd of supporters in Florida, declaring victory minutes after ABC News and other outlets called Pennsylvania for him.
I will not rest until we have delivered the strong, safe, and prosperous America that our children deserve and that you deserve. This will truly be the golden age of America.
The former president, whose campaign was fueled by dark rhetoric and calls for revenge, now pledging to help heal the country.
It's time to put the divisions of the past 4 years behind us. It's time to unite. And we're going to try. We have to try. And it's going to happen. Success will bring us together.
Turning to some of his top priorities, like securing the southern border, boosting energy production, and avoiding overseas conflicts.
I will govern by a simple motto: promises made, promises kept. We're going to keep our promises. Nothing will stop me from keeping my word to you, the people.
The race ultimately coming down to 7 swing states. Trump may now sweep all of them. After 11 p.m., the first one was called for him. The former president later winning Georgia, then Pennsylvania, and clinching victory with a win in Wisconsin. In county after county across the country, improving on his margin of victory in past races. ABC News exit polling data showing Trump gained critical ground, particularly among young men in union households. But his most surprising surge among Hispanic voters. The best showing for a Republican presidential candidate in exit polls since 1976. Up 13 points from 2020, although he still trailed Harris 53-45.
We've built the biggest, the broadest, the most unified coalition. They've never seen anything like it in all of American history.
So Trump is now the first former president to return to the White House in more than 130 years and the first convicted felon to be elected, also the oldest. And guys, while he was speaking, making that address last night, he made no mention of Vice President Kamala Harris.
And when did the Trump team know they had victory in hand?
They started to feel really good when they started to see the results in North Carolina. He spent more time campaigning there in the final days of this campaign than anywhere else, but really all eyes were on all-important Pennsylvania. The former president campaigning in that state said repeatedly, if we win here, we win the entire thing. When they started to see how much they were racking up the margins in counties that they won even 4 years ago, that is when they felt like they had this in the bag. And I got a text from a campaign source just about an hour ago that said it was a good night, but it was better than they expected.
All right, Rachel. Thank you so much for that.
So Michigan now officially projected to go to Trump. What more do we know?
Yeah, ABC is now projecting that Michigan will go for Donald Trump. It looked like it was heading that way last night. Now it's official. And I want to note, this ultimately was a very close race in Michigan. It looked like of those northern battleground states, Pennsylvania might be the closest. In the end, Trump won there by about 3 points. But this is not a big margin at all. And so when we're talking about the message that this election sent, yes, there was a rightward shift across the country. But it is not something like a sea change or a massive disruption of an election like we saw in, say, 2008 that was a total landslide, or 1992, for example, when Clinton won. We're not seeing margins like that. We're seeing relatively slim margins in some of these states that Democrats are obviously going to try to fight their way back from. So ultimately, pretty close in Michigan and pretty close to what the polls were showing us leading into the election.
So the American people went to the polls and they made it clear the economy was one of the most important issues. And let's talk about how that impacted results, clearly.
Yeah, absolutely. About a third of Americans who voted on Tuesday said that it was the most important issue. And when we're talking about the economy, a lot of what we're talking about is inflation. We saw the highest levels of inflation the country has seen in about 4 decades in 2022, all-time. Ultimately, it reached a level of 9% annual inflation over the summer. And that impacted people. Prices were growing faster than wages, so it made it harder for people to purchase everyday things. As a result, interest rates rose. And so it made it harder to borrow and pay down credit card loans or student loans or buy a house or a car or things like that. And, that may have impacted out of the whole electorate younger people under 40 trying to make the biggest purchases perhaps of their lifetimes. And we saw that actually Trump improved his margins with young voters in this election. So they may have been particularly upset about cost of living issues in this election.
Well, there's still a number of House races that haven't been called. Where do we stand?
Yeah, so as we can see, we have not gotten to 218 for either party at this moment, although Republicans are closer with 204 seats projected for them. Democrats a little bit further away. It looks like it's going to ultimately come down to the wire. And we may not know actually for days who ends up controlling the House, because some of those seats that remain to be projected are in California. Many of them, in fact, California takes a while to count its vote. But I do want to make a point here, which is that in the past two presidential elections, we've seen sort of generic Republicans, House Republicans, Senate Republicans, run ahead of Donald Trump, perform better than him. That's not what we saw last night. Part of the reason that we're waiting to see who will win the House race is because Trump did better than a lot of these generic Republicans. Democrats are still able to pick up some competitive seats around the country. And look, at the end of the day, whether Democrats or Republicans win the House is going to make a big difference in terms of what governance looks like over the next 2 years, at least until the next midterms. If Republicans have full control, they will be able to enact a lot of the policy promises that Donald Trump made on the campaign trail. If Democrats end up controlling it, then they will be able to stymie a lot of that, and they will be able to make their case and try to hold the president accountable. So we will see how that shakes out.
All right, Galen Druk, sure appreciate you.
I appreciate you.
A resounding victory for Donald Trump, the president-elect, improving on his numbers really across rural America and gaining ground with Latino voters, suburban voters, young voters, and peeling away some support from the Democrats in the big cities. So let's get right to the big board. Rick Klein's back with us here tonight. Rick, take us right through the path, right through those so-called blue wall states that Kamala Harris was hoping for, and really where Donald Trump vastly improved on his numbers in his past two campaigns.
Yeah, David, this is where the map stands at this hour, and we were very focused on the battleground states in particular. We talked about all the paths to victory. And basically, Donald Trump occupied all of those paths. He was able to take North Carolina and Georgia early in the night. Then he took the big prize of Pennsylvania. Then Wisconsin clinched the presidency for him. Today, we're projecting that he will take Michigan as well. He's leading in Nevada and Arizona as well. And what's really striking is how he ran up the numbers basically everywhere he went, whether it's cities or rural areas. I was looking at some of the Latino areas outside of Philadelphia as an example. Looking right there at Reading, you see Donald Trump improving his vote share in a Latino area and in a bluer Latino area as well. More people voting for Donald Trump. He was able to run up the numbers so much, as a matter of fact, that he is poised to do what he didn't do when he ran the last two times, which is win the popular vote. He is up over Kamala Harris by some 4.7 million votes at this hour.
In the popular vote as well. Rick Klein with us. And Rick, we appreciate it all night long here last night, you taking us through the electoral map.